Welcome back, everybody. Today we'll talk about Eastern philosophy, and in particular, we'll take a taste of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. So recall that we had learned Alan Watts's philosophy about the nature of reality and how it's one big process. Though our intuitions might say something like it's made up of things, and those things are related to one another and interact in causal chains, Watts says that that is a fiction, that the ultimate nature of reality beyond that fiction is simply process. That reality is a verb more than it is a noun. And if you see reality that way, then you have to see who you are much differently too, because you are no longer a thing within that reality, but you are reality itself. You are the universe itself, having a perspective from a particular point of view. You are the peopling rocks. You are the wave within the ocean. And though you look across and it feels as if there are other waves, the fundamental truth of your selfhood is identification with the big overarching process that all things are a part of. So Watts formulated this philosophy as a result of his studies of Eastern traditions. And we're going to get a sense for these Eastern traditions, a little taste of them today. So first, Hinduism. So the Hindu cosmology, story of the cosmos, says the following, that there is an underlying reality, impersonal, meaning not a being, but beingness itself. And that underlying reality, this beingness, is that which all things arise. So every manifestation, every experience, all things are from Brahman. When we take a look at the world and ask what is ultimately real, Brahman is ultimately real. Within this cosmology, we're told that there are individual selves, Atman, and these individual selves have lives, so they are born, they live their life, and then they die, only to be reincarnated, right? Only to be reborn again in new form, in a new body. And this is the human condition, according to Hinduism, that we're caught in this continual cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. And this sort of experience is limited. It's limited in terms of what we are aware of. So we have limited awareness. It's limited in terms of our experience of aliveness. So it's limited aliveness. And it's limited in bliss. And if you've ever taken a test, or if you are struggling through COVID, or if you're struggling with the political climate, you felt what it feels like to be caught in a limited existence. You probably don't feel fully alive at times, right? Just go through the motions of life. You probably don't feel ultimately blissful all the time, especially if you don't do so well in the exam, or if you're trying to cram to get everything you need to get done before deadlines. So we're caught. We're caught in this wheel of samsara. In how we are reborn, the circumstances of our lives is governed by the law of karma. And simply, this is just the idea that what you do has consequences, that your life and the way you live it will affect you at some point. So within the cosmology, how you live this life will influence the circumstances of your life in the next. Why are we caught here? Well, we're trapped in this continual cycle because we are under some sort of illusion, some sort of false understanding, false perception. The term for that is Maya. Because of our false perception, because of our false understanding, we continually live this cyclic life. However, we can escape. We can break free from this cycle once we are able to see through Maya and either reunite with Brahman or come to the realization that Atman is Brahman. That this perception that I am a separate self, separate from the underlying ground of existence, that is an illusion. That is not true. And in fact, we are all that is. We are, at our roots, ultimate reality. Now, there are various ways of looking at this cosmology. One way is to say we need to reunite with Brahman, that is what we are, that's where we came from. So we need to reunite with that. That's a yogic view. Yoga refers to unite, to yoke, to bind together. So the yogic view is about reunifying ourselves with ultimate reality, because we often associate ourselves with a more material existence, but the ultimate nature of reality, that's what we need to reconnect with. Another way of looking at this cosmology is to say, no, it's not about reconnecting with Brahman. Let me move my face here so you can see the term. It's not about reconnecting with Brahman. It's about realizing that right now there is no distinction between material and spiritual realm, that right now you are Brahman, that you've just forgotten, that you just don't remember, that at your root, you are that from which everything arises. You are the ultimate nature of reality. That's who you really are. And if that's true, that means that's who we all are. That when you talk to somebody, speak to somebody, and when you have an argument with somebody, that's not a separate being. Ultimately, what that is just you. You are arguing with yourself. Advaita here refers to not to. Vedanta refers to the philosophy, the spiritual texts that are fundamental to Hinduism. So the Advaita Vedanta view refers to this philosophical point of view that says not two. There aren't you and then something else. All there is Brahman. There's not two distinct things here. Think about our analogies from last class, right? We often think of the world in terms of parts, crest and a trough. That's a dualistic way of experiencing reality, to parse it up into parts, especially opposite parts. Crest, opposite of trough. But Advaita says, no. Fundamental to reality is that that's all, that's not two. It's Brahman. We took a look at the raining that was occurring through a window in the last class, and we say it is raining as if there's a thing that's doing an action, when in fact, well, isn't it more accurate to say raining is occurring, not something causing something else, right? It's a process. Raining is occurring. For the Advaita Vedanta philosophy, the place that you're trying to get to in life, this experience of ultimate aliveness, ultimate awareness, ultimate bliss, isn't something out there that you're striving to achieve. No. You're that already. That's who you fundamentally are. It's just that you are not connected. You don't realize that. You've forgotten. So, as a result, if we take a look at some of the questions we've looked at in our class and ask, okay, well, what's the fundamental nature of reality according to Hinduism? Well, we see that we're caught in this continual wheel, right? We're caught in a cycle. It's process. But that's the conditioned nature of reality. That's how most of us feel about life. Haven't you felt like that about life? You just wake up, do your work, go to sleep, wake up, do your work, go to sleep. Have you ever felt like you're caught in that process? Or have you ever found yourself caught with habits? That you're caught in the habit of always being a certain way, right? Or maybe you know people in your life that have difficulty because they're caught up in ruts. They're caught up in some sort of pattern of life. That's the human condition, says Hinduism. But there's a more ultimate reality. And that ultimate reality, the term they give to it is Brahman. If you ask, well, okay, what exactly is it? Can you describe what it is? Because of the nature of the question, you can't answer it. Because of the limitations of language, we can't answer it. The best that people say within the Hindu philosophy is Sat Chit Ananda, ultimate aliveness, ultimate awareness, ultimate bliss. That's the experience of ultimate reality. A Western mind might have trouble making sense of that, right? That's not how we often think about reality per se. Because now it's much more subjective, isn't it? It's not about reality as it is, but it's about our experience of reality. How about this other question? How about personal identity? When we take a look at the Hindu philosophy, what does it say about personal identity? You are it. You are all that is. It's just that you've forgotten your identity. You're not in touch with it. You're not connected with it. But who you really are is all of reality itself. What about questions of knowledge and truth? Well, for our conditioned existence, in Hinduism, we're told our knowledge is really illusory. It's really false. It's really Maya. And the only real truth is the truth of your identity, the truth of who you really are. Now, let's stand back for a second, try to make sense out of this. If you are not from the East, if you've never been exposed to these ideas, it can kind of hit you in a weird way where you're trying to make heads and tails out of it, right? But oftentimes this is because we're taking with us a analytical point of view, a Western framework for understanding something that's in a different language, that's from a different thought process. Here, think about these in terms of experience. Remember we talked about at the very beginning of the week, where Eastern philosophy is much more concerned with subjective knowledge rather than objective knowledge. What we're being pointed to here is really an experience of life. Right? Ultimate reality is in reference to our experience of life. Who are you? It's related to our experience of life. What's knowledge? It's in relationship to our experience of life. If you have felt as if you've been caught in some sort of cycle, you do maybe some these bad habits, or you tend to do some of these so stupid mistakes over and over again, you might be under a false perception of something. You might have a false view of something. And if you can just get past that, right? If you can get to the truth that what you are is already who you want to be, how much less anxiety and stress might you feel? Think about all the striving you do in your life as it is to get someplace. What if I said, no, where are you trying to get to? That experience that you're trying to get to from that job or that girlfriend or boyfriend or from that new pair of shoes, that experience, no, that's already who you are. You just forgot. If you're always chasing after the bigger, better, larger thing, car, computer, TV monitor, TV screen, might you be caught up in a cycle? Might you be caught up in a cycle because of a false perception that your happiness is the result of an object? What if you got rid of that and realized that who you are is what you're trying to get? Who you are already is what you're trying to aim for. This is a little bit different approach to philosophy, isn't it? It's a little bit different way of thinking about philosophy. Can you see how this had influenced Watts and some of the ideas he came up with or articulated in our last reading? In addition to Hinduism, Watts was heavily influenced by Buddhism. So the first thing to know about the Buddha's origin story is that the Buddha is not the person's formal name. The Buddha, the term Buddha refers to enlightened one. So those who refer to this individual as Buddha, they are acknowledging that this person's teachings come from somebody who sees, who is able to grasp reality clearly. The Buddha was born, Siddhartha Gautama, in India. He was born to noble parents. This origin story goes, he was born to a family of great wealth, who were rulers of a kingdom. Before his birth, they were visited by an angel who said, your son has two possible paths. That one of them is to be a ruler of a great kingdom and enjoy wealth and fame. And the other path is one of poverty, but they would become the great redeemer of the world. Well, the parents, trying to be good parents, wanted their son to maintain his wealth, to maintain his status, not be poor and live as a pauper. the angel said, well, in order to do that, you must make sure that your son never leaves the kingdom. So as the Buddha was growing up, the parents would do everything they could to satisfy all the Buddha's wants and desires so that he would no longer have any desire to explore outside the kingdom. As he got older into his adolescence, he was curious. He was wondering what was outside, what was beyond our kingdom walls. And him and a guard went out for the first time, and the Buddha saw various things that he had never seen before, such as sick people, because his parents tried to avoid exposing him to anything that wasn't pleasant, so that the Buddha would never want to leave. In addition to sick people, he saw old people, people who had difficulty walking, who had difficulty standing up straight, who were frail because of their old age. Buddha also saw death for the first time. Saw an individual being carried away, not moving. The Buddha asked, what happened to that? Why is he sleeping? And the guard told him, that's death. That happens to all of us. And then lastly, the Buddha saw somebody in little attire that was begging for food. And the guard told him that is somebody who is an ascetic. It's a monk who has decided to renounce all their possessions in order to gain a spiritual enlightenment. So the Buddha was distraught after seeing all of these things, goes home and contemplates, I can't unsee this. I have to do something about all of this pain and suffering that I saw out there. So the Buddha left his home, left the kingdom, went out to try to find a solution to all of that pain and suffering. Through that journey, he went through various trials and tribulations. Eventually, after becoming a student of various gurus, after participating in various spiritual practices, he simply sat down under a Bodhi tree because nothing he had done prior helped him find the answers he sought. So here he was, simply just sitting, meditating under the tree, simply waiting to find out what could be done about all that pain and suffering. And it was said that under that Bodhi tree, he became awakened. He saw reality for what it was. And it was at this point that he became the Buddha. So with that as our background, as we try to relate this to our questions in philosophy, well, what did he see? What was the nature of reality that he was that he recognized by sitting under that tree? Well, we'll split this up into two parts. The first is that he came up with 3 marks of existence, and the second is that from his view of reality, he arrived at 4 noble truths. So, as he's sitting under this Bodhi tree, what did he note of reality? What were the marks of existence? 1, he said, well, life in this world is filled with suffering. That it seems to be what the hallmark is of life. That human existence seems to be one where we are bound to suffer. 2, that everything in this world is impermanent. Just imagine sitting under a tree. If you are conscious and wide awake, what would you notice? Well, you'd notice the grass grow. You'd notice the birds flying in and out. You'd notice the mountains slowly crumble. You'd notice the trees, leaves slowly wither and fall. You notice constant change. So not only is the world full of human suffering, but the world is in constant flux. It's not static. And though an object might seem static to us, if you looked close enough, if you looked long enough, you notice that all objects are in continuous movement, continuous flux. 3, if all things are in continuous flux, if all things are in continuous movement, that must be true of the self also, which means there is no permanent self. There is no soul, says the Buddha. There is nothing that persists through time that's always constant that we call an I. These were his 3 marks of existence. And as he looked at reality and And as he was keeping his mind open for the solution for suffering, he arrived at his four noble truths. One, that life in the world is full of suffering. The term is dukkha, dukkha. But the cause of the suffering, he says, the cause of the suffering is tanha. If you've learned about this before, you may have heard it stated as desire, but it's more specific than just desire. It's this grasping, it's this craving for something. Imagine you're trying to get somebody to like you, right? And you go ask this person out, and then they turn you down, and it hurts, it's painful. But the cause of our suffering, says the Buddha, isn't the fact that they turned you down. Cause of your suffering is your craving. You're being consumed by desire for them. That's why you suffer. Think about being in a class, right? And we all sometimes get hungry, but have you ever been consumed by that thought? So here you are listening to a lecture and you're hungry and you're like, oh my God, I just want a pizza right now so bad. I just need a burger really bad right now. The Buddha says, just like with all suffering, it's not you not having the burger, it's not you not having the pizza that's causing you to suffer. It's your craving for it. It's your incessant thought of wanting it that's causing you to suffer. And, he says, the solution to dukkha is to get rid of that craving. And when you get rid of that craving, you will experience nirvana. So what exactly is nirvana? Nirvana is a term used when you extinguish something, like extinguish a candle, to blow it out. So in some sense, you can think of nirvana as not some other dimension where you go to at some point in life, but it's the extinguishing of suffering, or maybe the extinguishing of self, right? The self-centered self. But in order to get rid of dukkha, you have to eliminate tanha, and thereby you experience nirvana. Now that we have a diagnosis of the cause of the suffering, what's the Buddhist prescription? The Buddhist prescription is referred to as the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path, as outlined on your screen, is often said as being right action, right view, right intention, right mindfulness, etc. And people often think of it as an ethic, like you do the right thing, you say the right thing, you have the right intention. But the Pali word, right, the original word that was used by the Buddha for right, can be best described maybe, or best translated as like the wise thing, right? Or the more appropriate thing. So appropriate view, wise intention, appropriate intention. Now, what does that mean? Well, depending on the type of Buddhism you follow, you might hear people say, well, right view, right action, right intention really refers to coming from a place of loving kindness. When you speak to somebody, are you speaking to them because you want something from them, because you want them to believe what you believe, or you want them to do an action? Or are you coming into the conversation out of loving kindness? When you act in the world, are you trying to get things for yourself? Are you trying to fulfill a desire? Or are you acting in the world out of loving kindness? What is your intention when you do these things? Is your intention to fulfill something that in your mind you had set to do? Or is your intention out of loving kindness? Notice what happens if you do these things, participate in the world out of loving kindness. You no longer are likely to get caught in self-centered desire, self-centered craving. How often do you get upset because somebody said the wrong thing to you? How often do you get upset because somebody nudged you as you're walking down the mall and it feels like they disrespected you? How often do you feel anxious or stressed out because your boss said a disparaging word, or your parents kind of gave you that look? The Buddha says, all of that suffering is a result of self-centered craving. You want people to see you a certain way. You want people to treat you a certain way. But if you realize there is no I, there's no you there that needs to be built up, that needs to be, seen a certain way, well, then there's no need, there's no craving anymore. There's no self-centered craving, which means no more suffering. Notice the type of philosophical process here, thought process we are seeing from the Buddha. Not necessarily an argument, right? Not necessarily premises followed by conclusion, but he's giving us a story of suffering. He's giving us a story about the self. He's saying you don't exist, not because he's trying to make a metaphysical claim per se, but because in terms of living in the world, realizing that you are just telling yourself a story of who you are gets in the way of you experiencing nirvana. So let's take a look at some fundamental questions of philosophy with regards to Buddhism. What's the nature of reality? Well, the conditioned one, the one that most human beings experience, is suffering. It's impermanence. This is the ultimate, this is the conditioned nature of reality. But ultimately, what's real is nirvana. Ultimately, what's real is this experience of enlightenment where you can see clearly how reality works. That's a different way of answering the question than we're used to, right? Not matter, not immaterial substance. No, this is reality is suffering. Reality is impermanent. Reality is nirvana. Reality is enlightenment. The nature of personal identity, then, well, identity again, is that there is no you, right? There is no separate, permanent sense of self that exists through time. No soul, says the Buddha. How about the nature of knowledge according to Buddhism? Well, knowledge is gained through you experiencing. The Buddha does not want us to take these things for granted. He wants us to experience them and to learn for ourselves about suffering and about how to alleviate suffering. In one sense, you can call him an empiricist, but notice it's not the same sort of way we often think about empiricism. This isn't about objective experience, seeing something right objectively and saying, oh, look, that thing is blue, or there are two cups in front of me. No, this is about subjective experience. You learn, you gain knowledge through your experience of life. Wisdom, the pursuit of wisdom, is about you living through the ups and downs and the suffering, right? The pain, to get a sense for how life actually works. The third philosophy that was influential to Alan Watts's picture of reality and self is Taoism. And Taoism originated in China over a couple thousands of years ago. The primary texts, the ones that we'll take a look at from excerpts today, are from the Tao Te Ching. And the Tao Te Ching is said to have been written by Lao Tzu, but Lao Tzu is not a formal name again, but simply a title which refers to old master. There is an origin story with Lao Tzu, as there is with, again, the founders for these major traditions. Lao Tzu is said to have been born of a shooting star. So his mother was not impregnated by another human, but by a shooting star. And when Lao Tzu was born, he came out of the womb an old man. And he is said to have written the entire Tao Te Ching, main work of Taoism, within 3 days. Okay. So what do we make of this origin story? And what do we make of the Buddha's origin story? How do we take this? If we take a look at this from a Western philosophical point of view, we'd ask questions about the factual accuracy of these statements, right? Let's find out the truth of them and then come to a conclusion about what actually happened. But these stories are not that sort of knowledge. Remember, it's not propositional knowledge that these stories are trying to get across, but knowledge of acquaintance. They're trying to give us a feeling for how they experience these people. If I tell you the Buddha story, tell you he had to overcome all of these ideals, and then he sat under a tree and became enlightened, I'm trying to give you the sense that wisdom comes from leaving something behind, something that you were firmly holding on to. And you're going to feel as if you're lost at times because you're so used to what you thought you knew. But if you can persevere through it, you can come out with growth. You come out with new knowledge. If I'm telling you this story from Lao Tzu, what am I trying to get across to you? What sort of a experience, right? Knowledge of acquaintance am I trying to get across to you? Well, shooting star, I'm trying to get across to you the idea that this person and his teachings come from someplace else, right? From another realm of existence. That's how insightful and meaningful this wisdom is. When I say he comes out as an old man, I mean, what can I be getting across? Well, the Taoists are getting across to us the experience that they have, that this knowledge comes from somebody wise, that they were wise even from birth. And we have to get into this sort of different process of thinking in order to really understand Eastern philosophy, right? not just declarative statements, propositional knowledge, but knowledge of acquaintance, knowledge how to do something. Well, think about the nature of reality. When Lao Tzu looked at reality, what did he see? He saw the Tao. That's what he saw. And the Tao appeared to him as a reality of apparent opposites. And that symbolized in the yin-yang symbol on the screen. And I say apparent opposites for a reason. So what is this Tao that he sees when he takes a look at reality? The Tao, literally translated, just means the way. And in particular, it's the pattern of everything. It's the process of everything. It's the ebb and flow of all life. That's reality. Reality is reality, says the Taoist. So exactly what did he see? Well, when Lao Tzu looks at reality, it seems to have a natural rhythm to it and natural intelligence to it. You cut your hand, you don't need to think about moving your cells towards the wound in order to create a scab. Your body naturally knows what to do. When the birds get hungry, they naturally know how to feed themselves. When the seasons change, the birds naturally know where to fly. They didn't have to go to school to learn that. They didn't have to be trained by their mother bird to do that. They naturally know. If you take a look at a tree, it didn't go to college to figure out how to flourish. Or a flower, it didn't have to go to college or read up on Wikipedia, hey, how do I grow? It naturally knows. And as we mentioned, it seems to have a natural flow to it, a natural pattern to it. Take a look at the oceans. You see the waves come in, and then the water recedes, the sun comes up, the sun comes down, the days, the seasons. There seems to be a natural ebb and flow, natural pattern to life. But beyond nature and what you see in the physical, natural environment, the Taoists say, no, that's true of your life too, that your life has a natural movement and pattern to it. But the problem is that we often don't see it. We often ignore the natural pattern of life, and we impose our own ideas upon life. So what is the Tao then? Well, the Tao is this natural intelligence. The Tao is this natural flow, this natural rhythm of life. And remember that the Tao, according to Lao Tzu, is comprised of apparent opposites. If you take a look at the symbol on your screen, what strikes you? Well, if you realize it's circular, so no beginning, no end. It's made up of two halves, but the halves themselves don't really have an end or beginning. And in fact, one half leads into the other, and each half has within it a kernel of the other half. So the symbol represents this continual process, this continual ebb and flow, where what we think of as being opposites are really two sides of the same coin. This is the principle of yin-yang. It refers to the harmony of opposites. The idea here then is that reality isn't made up of this or that. Reality is a whole, is a complete whole. And when we think of it as being comprised of opposing forces, that's just how we are perceiving what we are witnessing. But in fact, the opposing forces are really complementary, right? And the problem is that when we latch onto one and they reject the other, we cause disharmony in life. When we start to say this is good and that's bad and cling to the good and try to force that through the entire time without realizing that there's a flow to life, then we cause disharmony. We experience disharmony with the Tao. For the Taoist, we can be more in harmony with life by simply letting go and not clinging to an agenda of how things are supposed to be, to not forcing our ideas of what's supposed to happen onto reality. If you try to force reality to be different than it is, you're going to lose, because reality is how it is. Reality is reality. But the way our minds often work is we often categorize and parse things up into this or that, yes or no, right or wrong, good or bad, because that's how we make sense out of life and makes it easy for us to navigate through life. Again, fictions, remember Watts's idea of fictions are useful to the extent we know that they're fictions. all of Greek philosophy, or a lot of Greek philosophy, which has influenced, a lot of the Western philosophy we've looked at, has seen the world as black or white, yes or no. Where when we take a look at an argument, if there's a contradiction, something is wrong. Within Taoist, no. The contradiction is natural. The contradiction is inherent. So what do we mean in harmony with the Tao? Let's ground this. What makes it hard for people to float? Have you ever seen somebody trying to swim for the first time and they get into the water and they're freaking out? Why is it hard for them to float? What do they do when they first get in the water? They try to fight it, don't they? They struggle and they try to fight the water, because when you're afraid, you fight. That's like what we naturally sort of do. The Taoist says, no, let go. Stop trying to fight reality. How do you float? You relax into the water. You let go. For the Taoist, for us to be in harmony with the Tao, to be in line with the natural rhythm and pattern of life, we have to let go of fighting reality, imposing our idea of right and wrong and good, imposing our agenda of what's supposed to be. We have to let go and keep our eyes open for how reality actually is. The term of what you're supposed to do to be in harmony is referred to as Wu-Wei, and this is what you learn about in your readings. Wu-Wei literally means non-action, but it's really, you can think of it as not forcing, not pushing, right? Chapter 63 of the Tao Te Ching, act without doing, work without effort, means you get stuff done without forcing it to happen, right? It means letting go every once in a while of your plan of how it's supposed to unfold, so that you can be more aware of how reality is actually working. Imagine you're paddling through a river. If you paddle upstream, which you can do, it's much more difficult because you're going against the natural flow of the currents. But if you turn yourself around and go with the currents down the river, now you have the full force of the river behind you. And now you're in harmony with the current. For the Taoists, they say most of us, we force our way upstream. We have an idea of what's supposed to be like, what life is supposed to be like, or how we're supposed to get to where we want to go in life, and we push it, push and push. The Taoists, they said, no, turn your ship around, figure out the direction the current is flowing, and now you have the full force of the universe, full force of reality with you to get you to where you're supposed to go. So here are other examples of Wu-Wei that you might be able to relate to. You ever have trouble going to sleep? You're like worried about getting up in time for a test or something. So you go, okay, I got to go to bed. I got to go to bed early. I'll go to bed like 10 o'clock. And then you're worried because, I got to go to bed at 10 o'clock. I got to wake up for this exam. And then you close your eyes and then you look at the clock, seeing how much time has passed. It's like 11 o'clock. Oh, God, I got to go to sleep. I got to sleep. I got to sleep. So you try to go to bed, trying to go to sleep, You open your eyes again, 2 a.m. And you're freaking out now because you haven't had any sleep. It's 2 a.m. already. You're like, come on, I got to go to bed. I got to go to bed. I got to get some rest for this exam tomorrow. What's keeping you awake? What's keeping you awake is you trying to force sleeping. But your body naturally knows how to sleep. So let go, say the Taoists. Stop forcing it to happen and just let go. And what you'll realize is that your body inherently knows what it's doing. Here's a story to help kind of clarify Taoism. There's a farmer who had a horse that helped out with the farm. If you don't know anything about farms, horses do lots of good work in the farms. So when one day this horse runs away, and this is a horrible thing, because now this is one animal that the farmer was relying to all this work, and now the horse is gone. This very needed thing in the farm is gone. The neighbor comes rushing over and says, "Oh, I saw your horse ran away. I'm so sorry to see that." And instead of being sad or depressed, the farmer says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" The neighbor's like, "What do you mean, who knows? Your horse just ran away." The neighbor was bewildered and went back home. Next day, the horse comes back, and with it, he brings in a bunch of other wild horses. So a lot more animals to help with the farm. The neighbor sees this and rushes over to the farm and goes, "Wow, congratulations on all these horses that you have to work on your farm now." And instead of being excited or joyful, the farmer goes, "Who knows what's good or bad?" Again, the neighbor's like bewildered. What do you mean? You have all these new horses to work on your farm. Anyway, the neighbor goes back home. The following day, the farmer's son is on top of one of the wild horses trying to tame it to use on the farm and is thrown off and breaks his leg. The neighbor again rushes over, seeing the son had broken his leg, and says, "Oh my gosh, this is horrible. I'm so sorry to see that your son broke his leg." And instead of being scared or angry or upset, the farmer goes, "Who knows what's good or bad?" The neighbor's like, "What do you mean this is good or bad? Your son just broke his leg. This is crazy." Well, the next day, the army comes through town trying to recruit all able-bodied citizens for a great war that they are about to partake in, knowing that they lose many lives. And seeing that the son had broken his leg, they did not recruit the son. The neighbor, again, sees this, comes over and says, "Wow, so glad to see that your son was saved from entering that war." And the farmer again says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" Can you see how this relates to Taoism and what we've learned so far? How could this principle of Wu-Wei, of letting go of your agenda and your preconceived notions of right and wrong, good or bad, how could this have been useful to you at some point in your life? Can you think of any where you try to force something to happen, and if you just let go, if you just were to keep your eyes open and let reality show itself to you, you would have figured a more effective way of approaching something? So let's relate Taoism to some of the philosophical questions we've looked at so far in our class. The nature of reality, well, it's reality. That's what it is. What's the nature of reality? It's the way reality is. Open your eyes and see it, say the Taoists. But for most of us, the way we experience reality is one of disharmony, where we're fighting against the currents of life. We're trying to create our own tune instead of listening to what reality is singing to us. How about the nature of knowledge then? Nature of truth? Well, knowledge is wisdom of the Tao. What could that mean? Wisdom of the Tao. How about ethics? Well, there's no absolute right or wrong. For the Taoist, right and wrong is just a imposition. It's what we've imposed upon reality to categorize it, to chop it up. So in terms of rightness and goodness, well, there's none either in an absolute sense. Because all the ebbs and flows are part of life. And learning to be in harmony with it is the key. So what now? Now that we've gone through Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, can you see how this approach to philosophy is not so linear, not so analytical, much more about experience? Can you see how the types of truths are not about propositional statements of reality, but about truths on life and how to live in it? Can you see that the type of knowledge we are after isn't knowledge of facts, but knowledge of how to live in the world, of what life can feel like? It doesn't have to be suffering. It could be nirvana. It doesn't have to be disharmony. It could be harmony. It doesn't have to be caught in patterns. You can escape that to experience ultimate aliveness. A different emphasis when it comes to wisdom. But even with Western philosophy too, we can approach it that way. We can see Western philosophy in a way in which it could also give us a sense for what is possible in our life, for how to best live in it. And that's what we'll explore in our final class lecture, looking at Bertrand Russell's Value of Philosophy. Next class.